So maybe we can start from what was the intuition of Charles Darwin when he wrote in his notebook his, I think, quotation mark, and he drew this beautiful sketch. So that is where our conception of tree of life starts. Maybe we can start from there and then say why horizontal gene transfer breaks this shape.
Perfect. Yes, good idea. So Charles Darwin came home from the voyage of the Beagle in 1836, this 5-year round-the-world voyage that had taken this young, very conventional Englishman who was interested in natural history and geology, and showed him things in the natural world, including the species on the Galapagos Islands, that changed his old-fashioned religious conception of the origins of species, the origin of diversity on Earth, the idea that God had created all these creatures individually. Suddenly he was challenged to think in a new way and to say, no, I think that species evolved, diversity, adaptation evolved by natural processes. He did not yet have a theory how that could be done, a mechanism for it. And so back in London for 2 years, living in a house that essentially his father was paying for. He didn't have a job. He was impassioned to think about this. And he started a series of notebooks, little notebooks, just little pocket notebooks that became known as his transmutation notebooks. He was writing about his reading, writing about his thoughts. How can this be? How can diversity have arisen naturally? And in 1838, as I recall, in his B notebook, the second one, he drew a scrawled picture of a tree, just a very simple picture, like that, in his notebook. And beneath it, he wrote, "I think." And what he was saying was, I think that all creatures, all biological diversity, have arisen from common origins by a process of divergence, branching, splitting. Lineages have gone through time and reached points where a single lineage of creatures has split into 2 different kinds of lineages. We call that speciation now. And that's how diversity has arisen. And then around the same time, he got the idea of evolution by natural selection. How could this change happen? How could this branching divergence happen? And he realized that it's a matter of there is variation within populations of individuals. He wouldn't say genetic variation, but moths of one species have tiny little differences, one from another within that species. And then there's competition for resources. So the moths in that species are competing with one another. And there aren't enough resources for all of the caterpillars born to those moths. So they're competing. And that competition leads to the survival of the fittest, that famous term, so that the individual differences determine which moths survive, and that creates the possibility of divergence. Some moths are better living on this kind of tree. Some moths are better living on this kind of a tree. Suddenly you get separations, and then these lineages become more and more different over time. And that's the divergence. So that is the classic Darwinian evolutionary tree of life. It is all about divergence, divergence, divergence. This is my very, very sophisticated audiovisual aids. This is my PowerPoint.